Hello, and welcome to Unveiling a Titan, the first of what will be several videos in a series in which I hope to provide conclusive proof that Titans actually existed, or at the very least, a lot of compelling evidence that will spark curiosity. This is a famous mountain on the east coast of Spain, in the Costa Blanca, that's called Montgo. It's also known as the Elephant. So you can see the shape of the head here, the upper back, and then tapering off. And in fact, there's a plateau here that's higher than the town in this area that looks a lot like a trunk that's been extended when you see it from the right angle. I've been hiking this mountain for about 8 years now. I've been inside of the eye on numerous occasions. There are several other caves that I've also been in. But it's really only been for the last year that I've been looking at this mountain with different eyes, and I was exposed to some new ideas that caused me to look at it differently, and I began gathering evidence. I've taken lots of photographs and videos. I've been in places that I probably shouldn't have been, and even injured myself a couple of times. About a year ago, I got exposed to the idea of Titans. It wasn't the first time. As a kid, I was exposed to the mythology, the Greek mythologies, and watched this movie, The Clash of the Titans, saw the Kraken get turned to stone by the Medusa's head. And I ran across a couple of videos by Mud Fossils University talking about the idea that fossilization could happen much, much faster than we realized. Also looking at the idea that there was probably a worldwide flood that involved a great deal of mud that caused lots of creatures to be encased and then eventually fossilized. Another video by Jay Dreamers did this Petrified Titans video, which was very fascinating, and he made a pretty interesting case, I felt, for the possibility that Titans actually existed. And that was a real surprise to me because I grew up near a mountain in California called Chief's Peak, and it looks a lot like an Indian lying on its back, and I was always fascinated by the resemblance, but it never really occurred to me that, well, maybe it was. So I started seeing photographs like this and others. And it definitely sparked my imagination. This is Paul Bunyan with his buddy Blue, I believe, the big ox. The myth goes that the Grand Canyon was formed by him dragging his axe behind him. And he used to go around North America cutting down gigantic trees with his axe. So maybe there's some truth to that tale. So one of the first things a skeptic will think when they look at these kinds of pictures is that people are suffering from something known as pareidolia, which is when you see things that aren't really there. You look up at a cloud and you see a dragon or a face or something, and obviously that's not really in the cloud. And so it's easy to make the same mistake when you're looking at these kinds of photographs. But in Jay Dreamer's video, I started thinking a little differently when I photographs like this, because I've been living near this mountain that is known as the Elephant for the last 8 years, and when I saw these images I thought, maybe it's not just a mountain that looks like an elephant. Maybe there's actually more to it than that. So some of these might just be rocks that take that shape, that form, but you never know. Some of them might actually be fossilized elephants. And if that's the case, then everything we know about geology is based on erroneous thinking, and we need to start to revisit these different ologies. And in the last year and a half since I first got exposed to this idea, a lot of other interesting topics have come along. The idea that maybe our entire historical timeline has been manipulated and large segments of time have been injected. A lot of people are studying the works of Anatoly Fomenko, who makes those suppositions. The topic of star forts is incredibly fascinating, these gigantic star complexes that are found on every continent all around the world. The lost civilization of Tartaria, which is, it's mind-boggling, really, to consider that the largest empire in the history of humanity is something that isn't even touched on in our history books. And it's easily provable. There's a plethora of information out there, ancient maps and photographic evidence, all sorts of things that suggest that our understanding of our history has been manipulated. There are even people who suppose that giant trees existed that were, along the likes of Avatar, and a lot of this ties back into the mud flood idea, which is that there was once a major flood that swept across the entire world and covered up most everything living in its wake, and so that's how I got on this topic originally. I'll just give you a little overview. This is my plan for this video series. For those of you who are impatient, I'll just show you this right off the bat. This is a list of the different coincidences that I've compiled, and if you're interested in reading this, you can pause the video and do that. So obviously I don't want to suffer from pareidolia, and so when I started looking into this mountain, I decided I would look at it from a scientific perspective. I have a degree in medicine, and I've studied a lot of histology, and histology is the study of tissues. And the interesting thing about studying histology when you're looking at a mountain that's 5 kilometers long is that you don't need a microscope because you're so small that you are the microscope. So I've been going around for the last year taking tissue samples in the forms of videos and photographs, and I'll be sharing those in this video series. This is the list of what I'm planning on doing. So in this video I'm going to do an overview of the mountain, Mont Go, also known as the elephant. And in the next video I'm going to take a deep look into the eye of Mont Go, and you'll see the eye in just a moment. And in the third video I plan on going deep into the ear as well. And the fourth video, if you're still with me for that, that'll probably be broken up into several parts because it's a big topic, studying the different rocks and how they relate to the mountain and how they would relate to fossilized tissue. And then I hope to do a fifth video that is looking at what is the official story behind the mountain, and maybe even perhaps interview a geologist and talk to some of the people who really know this mountain. It's a national park, and there's a lot of mainstream study that's been done. And then where I'll go from there is a mystery at this point. So again, if you're interested in this topic, I'm not going to go in depth into the whole fossilization process, but there is a guy named Girolamo Sagato in the 1800s in Italy who was known to be able to petrify human flesh. So this guy's technique died with him, and it's a painful process to rebuild it, I suppose. But he was able to fossilize flesh, and obviously it didn't take thousands of years like we're told the fossilization process takes. Okay, so let's go into the mountain here. So obviously from this side is the side that it looks most like an elephant. You've got the shape that I already talked about in the opening there, and you saw some of the clips from the opening video that will give you their little teasers. The eye is interestingly placed. Hold on, let me get closer to it. And the anatomy of an elephant's skull we'll look at in just a moment. But I've been inside this eye on numerous occasions. There are caves along here. There's a cave here, which is very interestingly placed. But first, let's back up and just look at the mountain as a whole. So if we look at it from this side, most people can imagine that it looks like an elephant. The interesting thing is from this angle, if we look at it, you can see it looks like a head here, and there's even a cutout right where you would expect the neck to be. So the head ends, neck, and then this would be the shoulder. And when you see it from this angle, it becomes more evident. Now the interesting thing is from this side, you've got the same thing, another cutout here. So from above, it really does look like an elephant's head turned slightly to the right with cutouts for the neck on both sides. And this would be obviously the spine. And if we look down here, this is a deep canyon, and it's perfectly placed for the separation between two legs, one here and one here. And I'm not sure if this is the extension of the leg or if they're underneath this mound or what's happened exactly there. But as we look around on this side, you can really see the pattern of what look like ribs. And there's also been a lot of erosion here. So if we look at it from above, you can see the skirt of the mountain on this side is literally about twice the size of the skirt on this side. And that's because there's been a lot more runoff and erosion there. If we continue around, looking at the front of the head, you might be thinking, well, that doesn't look much like an elephant at all, because this area here has all collapsed. And we can see that when we look from above, there's a major runoff here going down. And geologists who studied this mountain have actually talked about this section of the mountain being particularly interesting because there's what's known as a synclinal here. So this is proof that this entire section of the mountain has collapsed. And that's an interesting thing. I'll show you why here. If we look at the anatomy picture. So we'll go through some of these pictures real quick. So if you look at an elephant skeleton, you think of the skeleton, or the elephant is lying on its stomach, then obviously this part would be tilted back. And that's really what we see when we look at Montgo from the side. You've got this point here, the head and the upper back are very close to each other, as if this was tilted upward. This is a mammoth skeleton and an elephant skeleton. So mammoths and elephants very similar, but there are wide variations in the skeletal structure of both mammoths, elephants, and the skulls vary dramatically from one species to another. We'll see more of that later. So this is what I want you to be thinking of when we're looking at this. Now, the elephant, Montgo, I see it as lying on its stomach. And if we look at an elephant from the inside, this is known as the viscera, all the organs, these are going to be soft. And so all of that is going to flatten out, and you'll see that in a second here. So this is an elephant carcass that's rotting away, and you can see how things are starting to sag, and they've all flattened out, but the bone structure is what really remains. Sorry for the awful images if it makes you queasy, but this is important to understand that all of the skirts on the side of the mountain may be the flattening out of the viscera. This is a mammoth skull that's been encased in mud, and so if you imagine that on a larger scale, then that may be what we have here. An elephant lying on its stomach, another elephant lying on its stomach. So this image again from above, looking at the head shape, the back, and the legs, and I don't know, maybe the right back leg was buried underneath. We'll get more into this in a moment, but this is interesting. So if you look at the eye placement and this muscle here, this is known as the temporalis muscle. Humans have this as well. The eye here, there's a little hole right here, which is very interesting, and the ear hole. Now this is a horrible picture because this elephant has been shot, but you can see with it laying down how the leg can bend underneath and the trunk can be out in front, and I believe that's what we're seeing when we're seeing the plateau here, because this is all above this area here below, which is the town. This is not a gunshot wound. This is actually a gland called the Must gland that's secreting, and when the elephants are in heat, I don't know if you call it heat, but if they're sexually excited or if they're afraid, they'll secrete from this gland, and they get very aggressive, and you don't want to be around them when they're doing that. This picture, it looks like he's smiling. I like that. Here you can see the head really comes up more on this particular species of elephant, and I think that's more like what we're seeing here with Moltko. And here we get into the skulls. This is very interesting because if you look, this is the breathing passage, and this is also where the trunk connects. And it's a huge hole. And if we look again from the front of the mountain, and again, this is that area that has collapsed, and I've got lots of pictures and video, and I've hiked on this whole region. This is like a river of jagged rock, this entire area here. So there's clearly been a major collapse of this part of the mountain. And that's exactly where I would expect there to be a collapse, is right where there's a big, giant cave. That would be the weakest point of the whole structure. Here you've got the ridge line of the skull. This has been maintained, but this is all collapsed. So that's the breathing passage. Here is the eye socket, and this is again the temporalis muscle, and this is known as the infraorbital foramen. This is where the nerves come from for the control of the trunk. Humans have this as well. All of the vertebrates have this little notch, but it's placed differently in humans. Let me find it real quick here. So you can see on humans it's here. There it is right there. 26 bones in the human head. I don't know how many are in the elephant's head, but all of those bones are connected by sutures, which are, just areas where the bones eventually fuse together. So this is bigger on elephants because the nerve passing through here has to control the trunk, and its location is particularly interesting because it's right about there. Here you see it again. A different skull, different shape to the nasal passage, completely different shape to the temporalis fossa. This is known as the zygomatic arch. There are two sutures here, so this is the first thing that would break off, and I believe that's what's happened when we see the mountain. You can kind of get a hint that maybe it was there. This may have been where the tusks came out. There's a suggestion of the remnants of the zygomatic arch there as well, right there. Another head that's been captured in mud and fossilized. And this really, when we're looking at Moltko, this is probably about the best picture I can find. You can barely make out the infraorbital foramen there, the eye socket. There you can see the sutures for the zygomatic arch, and the big temporalis fossa, and that would be here, the temporalis fossa. And really a good view of the infraorbital foramen. So let's take a look at that. If we look in here, the question is, how many coincidences does it take before there starts to be evidence, right? Does it just look like an elephant, or was it an elephant? Obviously if the shape and the cave are there, that's just that's a coincidence. But then when you start to get things like, cutouts on both sides right where you would expect the neck, the eye has a cave right where you would expect there to be an infraorbital foramen, especially if the skull has tilted backwards, which it would have to if it was lying in this position. I've already hinted at it with the video list I gave you, but there's an ear as well. This would be an ear attachment. And there's even a cave in here, which I found in the most unusual way. So I'll talk about that in the third video. But inside this cave, I can tell you, it doesn't just look like the eye. There are literally a dozen different quote-unquote coincidences about this eye, which I'll go into in detail in the next video. But there are caves in here that I've explored with a friend, and there are sutures, there are a number of different things. So it's the coincidences start stacking up, and that's what you have to ask yourself, is how many coincidences does it take before we start to have a possibility, a probability, and at what point does it become a preponderance of evidence? I know that Roger from Mud Fossils University has done, I think, 3 different genetic tests based on different samples that he's found, and they've all come back with humanoid DNA. So one thing, here's another thing, if we're just going to look at an overview. See all this red earth right here? Interesting. Here as well. What you find is that if you turn any stone over on this plateau, it is all bright red earth everywhere you look. And I think that this is the runoff of blood, and we'll talk more about that. In the 4th video, I'm going to be going into the histology, the tissues, and looking in depth at different rocks. I've got photos and video of those as well. Yeah, so I think that is a good introduction. So let me just look at my notes, see if I've forgotten anything. There are definitely some surprises that await, and if you stick with it, I think you'll, like me, you'll end up getting goosebumps on your arms with some of this stuff. Just go through the rest of these. So this is a bear, and you can see the bear has a huge nasal passage also, even though it doesn't have a trunk. But here, again, you see this infraorbital foramen, which I believe we have right here. And in fact, I'll do a little teaser right now, and we'll go in and look at a couple of the pictures here. This is the infraorbital foramen, looking through it. So it has a very organic feel, the rock. We'll come back to this in the next video. And this is mammoth once again. And this is what I was talking about with the sutures before. 26 bones in the human head. I would guess it's something similar, because most of the vertebrate skeletons, even though there are a lot of variations when it comes to the morphology, the shape of them, more or less the structures are the same, and the kinds of bones that are found as well. Okay, so if you are looking for conclusive proof, here it is. All right. I hope you enjoy the video. Oh, by the way, subscribe and click the bell if you want to be notified for the next videos when they're released.